All right, Shannon, let's start with, this Thursday split screen, right,
Woo.
of this trial against sort of the business interest of former President Trump in New York. In Georgia, you have in an Atlanta courtroom these questions about the prosecutor, in that case, Fani Willis. So I want to start at this, is the former president was kind of asked how he was going to balance all of these court appearances and campaigning, and he said, "I'll campaign in the evening." It's a funny line, but at what point now are all of these legal issues like a significant setback for somebody running for the presidency?
I think legally they are a real issue. I mean, we're talking about dozens of counts of felony criminal accusations. Now, thankfully, in our country, you're innocent until proven guilty. So there's a long way to go in these prosecutors having to come forward and show their evidence. If he's convicted, that's a different story. It doesn't stop him from running, but there is some softening in the polls if he is convicted on criminal charges. But for now, the majority of people say when you poll GOP potential voters, they don't really care. And the more that he's in court and can come out and say, this is the establishment after me, this is not a, prosecution only, it's a persecution. It's worked really well for him in fundraising, in polling, in wiping out nearly all of his rivals. And they've been forced to rush to his defense time and time again with these hearings. So, listen, this campaign is going to be unlike any we've seen before, especially if we have a rematch of 2020, which polling showed us people didn't want it. But if you've got a private jet and you can be in court all day saying, look at them beating me up and bringing these charges, and you can just go somewhere every night and rally people to say, look, I told you, and this is true, and this is proving it. I think with his really hardcore supporters, it's only going to make them dig in more.
So you're saying that if Taylor Swift can fly from Japan to the Super Bowl, then the former president can fly from courtrooms to campaign issues. Campaign events.
Jared, that you and I need a private jet.
Well, yeah, perhaps.
It would make our lives much simpler.
And probably more comfortable in those TSA lines.
Inexpensive.
Let me ask kind of about the actual elements of both of these cases, right? So let's start, and I really do want to start actually with what's happening in Georgia. Because this was a case that a lot of legal analysts had said it is a pretty strong case and really could be an issue for the former president as they look into these efforts to overturn votes and overturn the election in 2020. But so much of what's happening now are these 2 days of hearings on this alleged improper relationship between the DA in Fulton County, Fani Willis, and the attorney she hired to kind of lead the investigation. I guess my question is, if there was a relationship that predated her appointing him, why is that grounds then to kind of dismiss the whole case?
Well, if you've been able to watch, because we are covering 18 things today, but if you've been able to watch some of this hearing down in Georgia, from Nathan Wade, he's facing the possibility that he didn't tell the truth or fully tell the truth on these earlier interrogatories. We call them. It's sort of, they're questions that you put to someone in a case in a written format instead of sitting them down in a deposition. You may do both. You may do one or the other. But you can see these attorneys walking him through those today saying, did you really tell us the truth with those interrogatories? Because some of these dates don't line up. He's pressed back really hard. The question, I think, gets to be, was there a misuse of state money? Was there money that Fani Willis at some point was using to pay him that he was then benefiting her by going on vacations and those kinds of things? So it's a question about improper use of funds. He has said over and over again that they split their vacations, that she paid him back in cash whenever he put something on a credit card or paid for a cruise or some other trip. And you can see the attorneys pressing him really hard today on, well, what did you do with the cash? Did you ever deposit? Does she have, any kind of slip showing she withdrew this from the ATM or from her bank? Obviously cash is untraceable in these transactions. So, he's testifying under oath. That's what happened. But it really gets to the fact of, did they abuse or misuse funds? More personally to them, it would be whether they lied under oath at any point. Okay. Bottom line, though, this thing was roughly supposed to start in August. If you bounce a prosecutor or two, you could have to reconfigure the legal team. Could certainly end up with a very lengthy delay if the judge decides something nefarious was going on.
Because a lot of the questions that have happened on Thursday, too, have kind of been on timeline. The attorney Wade says that the relationship with Willis started after she had appointed him in this special investigative role. There are allegations that it started prior. Does that matter in the context of whether or not a judge kind of allows this case to move forward?
I think it really goes back to the money again. If it's traceable that she hired and paid him and then he used that money to benefit her in some way, which I think is going to be tough for them to connect all those dots based on the testimony he's giving on the stand today. But it's really about the flow of that money. And
so that would certainly be an abuse of power, I suppose, is the allegation. So if that were to be found and the judge says, yeah, I think that occurred, is the next step then to remove Willis as the prosecutor? And if that's the case, does the case and it's not just against the former president. I think this was initially brought by a lot of the other defendants. Does it go away for everybody? And what about the people who have already pleaded guilty?
Well, so, if this judge decides to say that Fani Willis can't continue to prosecute this case or Nathan Wade can't, either or, obviously, she would be a much bigger blow to this, because if you put together a new prosecution team, what if they decide that they present this case and they don't even bring charges, or they bring different charges or lesser charges?
So they would essentially have to start at square one.
They could. I mean, that's the worst case scenario for the Georgia prosecutors, best case scenario for Trump and his legal team and all those other defendants. Is that
a new prosecutor reaches a different conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or decides.
So that's the,
we're not going to bring all these
that is
RICO
the significance. I mean, that answers the question about why this is such a pivotal point in this case.
Right. Because I don't know that anybody really cares if these people were dating or what was going on in his marriage. I think that's completely irrelevant to the underlying case, unless there's that flow of money that then raises the question about whether she was misusing or mismanaging public funds in the prosecution of this case.
So let's turn then to New York. This is another state prosecution that deals with that hush money payment back during the former president's first run for office. So this is being brought forward by the Manhattan DA. The judge has said that he is not dismissing, and that this trial is going to start next month?
It sounds like it. It sounds like they're going to start jury selection March 25th. So, as you know, the former president, has a very busy schedule.
Looking at the election. Sorry, I was just looking at the primary calendar. I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the many things that, are overloading. If we still had Palm Pilots, his would be exploding right now. Just to date myself. Yeah, I miss the BlackBerry. I did love the BlackBerry. But remember, Jack Smith has wanted to start his trial on the January 6th, obstruction, those kinds of charges, March 4th. That's most certainly not happening.
Unlikely at this point. Yeah.
Seems very unlikely at this point. But gosh, there's going to be a jam up at some point of these multiple cases. You've got the Mar-a-Lago documents case that was supposed to begin in May. These cases can't overlap, and I think the judges will, and these courts will have to have some, coordination on that front, because some of these things the former president is required to be in the courtroom for the federal criminal cases unless something else has been worked out. So, but if the Alvin Bragg case, which was the first indictment of a former president, if that starts March 25th, it certainly sounds like it's going to.
How long is that trial? Is there a guess on sort of how long that trial might last?
I mean, it's a state trial. And there are very specific allegations. It isn't like the Georgia case, which is RICO and, 19 defendants and all these other people. So I think you're talking about, a matter of a couple weeks on the New York. I mean, that's just a guess on that one.
Yeah. But it's certainly in front of a jury, maybe by, before the convention.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that trial is a matter of weeks, not months.
Okay. Let me finish with the legal aspect, because you did bring up sort of the special counsel and what his timeline was looking like. The Supreme Court has now, do they have everything they need to figure out this question of immunity as it relates to the January 6th trial?
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you've got former President Trump and his legal team asking the Supreme Court to stay that decision that went against him on the immunity issue. They filed for the stay. To get a stay takes 5 justices voting for the stay.
So a majority would have to agree with the lower court or disagree with the lower court.
Well, they'd have to say, we think that we have the authority and need to intervene here to settle this question. Remember, when Jack Smith filed back in December, when he wanted it to be expedited, he used the line in his filing that only the Supreme Court can settle this issue. Then he gets this great ruling, the special counsel does, from D.C. Circuit, and now he's sort of like, yeah, you guys don't need to get involved here.
Never mind.
Need to take this case.
It's all settled.
Never mind. But to hear the case, if there were a formal writ of certiorari asking, the Trump team saying, we want you to hear this on the merits, Jack Smith opposes that, but says if you're going to do it on an expedited basis. But so, yeah, the Trump team's filed, Jack Smith is filed, and now we wait to see if the Supreme Court puts out some brief order saying, okay, we let the D.C. Circuit stand and we're not getting involved. Or we're getting involved and here's this expedited schedule possibly for briefing and arguing this case. Their term ends the end of June. And, Smith is asking for something much quicker than that, if they take it.
And they do seem to be inclined to expedite when they need to. I mean, you and I were in arguments in the Colorado ballot case, and we're waiting an opinion on that. But that was a wildly fast timeline for the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and when you say that to people, somebody said to me, why don't we have a decision yet on the Colorado ballot case? Yesterday asked me that, and I'm like, you do not understand. This has been lightning speed. This court, it takes years to get there, and you and I have just witnessed this happening in weeks. So I do think we get that Colorado decision pretty quickly, and I think the immunity decision could come pretty quickly, too. I mean, they have what they need to sit down and vote. We know they're in conference on Friday. If they don't vote before then, they can vote anytime. But we know they do work on these, Friday conferences, take votes on cases and that kind of thing. So I would imagine we could get an order relatively quickly from the court saying we're in or we're out on the immunity issue.
And that would be just another extraordinary question for this court. I mean, they are already kind of in uncharted waters here for a Supreme Court in these major kind of election issues. I think that was brought forward in the arguments last week with Colorado. All of the justices seem to appreciate the gravity of the question in front of them. Yeah. Yeah,
and we got to remind folks, too, that the court has already decided that they will hear this term, which means hear and decide before the end of June. This January 6th defendants, the cases where they're saying the obstruction charges the DOJ brought against them were improper and shouldn't have been used in this context. And remember, those are two of the charges against President Trump. So that's another thing that his team is going to argue. We can't start the Jack Smith, originally scheduled for March 4th, trial because the Supreme Court is going to rule on the use of two of these charges you now have pending against President Trump. I think they're going to try to push back on that as well. But that decision should come, before July.
We'll be watching for that. Let's talk a little bit about what was another unprecedented moment, really, was the Intelligence Committee chairman putting out a kind of cryptic message that there is this national security concern that is so great that it needs to be declassified so it can be openly discussed with allies and members of Congress, took this step to make that available to members of Congress. Wants the president to declassify it, the National Security Advisor comes out and says, I don't know what the statement was for. We were going to brief everybody on this later this week, and we're still going to do that. Obviously, a lot of reporting done by especially our own Jackie Heinrich here at the White House indicates that this is a new capability in the Russian military. It's not operative, but it's worrisome. What do we make of all of this, given the debate with Ukraine aid and kind of growing concerns about this geopolitical combativeness with Russia?
Yeah, Color, you and I, and everybody else who covers Washington, a little skeptical about that rollout yesterday. White House clearly ticked, not happy. Jake Sullivan had to, field numerous questions.
It sounds like a lot of the other intelligence committees weren't. I mean, the Senate put out a statement that was like, yeah, we know. And the I think the Speaker of the House was like, we're on it. It's going to be okay.
We're on it.
Somebody told me somebody told me it was not going to ruin my Wednesday, which I found comforting.
Now, will it ruin your March or April? I don't know. But you're right. There were so many statements that came out that said, we've been aware of this threat. It's based on raw intelligence. It is not something happening today or tomorrow, but it is a medium to long-term issue that we've got to handle. So, Mike Turner coming out, the chairman, making this statement raised a lot of eyebrows. They were about to, in the House, debate the FISA framework, which we're led to believe that's where this raw intelligence came from, was through the use of FISA. So
some of those
immediately I was
provisions
like,
expire
wait
in April. Congress is going to have to renew them. Yeah.
Right. And it allows surveillance of communications and those kinds of things. And so there are a lot of conservatives who are very, very upset about the use of FISA. And listen, I got to say, some folks on the left, too, are out there saying there should be no use of this that accidentally or purposefully scoops up Americans, which does happen. We've got, obviously, Fourth Amendment rights and all kinds of things. So there's an interesting coalition of left and right who say we've got major problems with FISA. It got yanked. The speaker pulled it from consideration after this Mike Turner announcement yesterday. So the question was, did Mike Turner feel like it was a good argument for FISA? Let's put it out there. Did he feel like it's a good argument for more aid to Ukraine? Let's get it out there. Or was there something else? But the timing just made a lot of our antenna go up.
And listen, I do think that there is legitimate concern about the capabilities of foreign adversaries being able to target, GPS systems and the satellites that we rely on for a lot of things I think we maybe take for granted. So clearly it is a concern, and I think that was expressed by everybody involved. But you're right, the timing raised some questions, given that it does not appear, at least based on any of the reporting out there, that this was sort of an imminent threat.
Right. So, yeah. But if it was about supporting FISA, that went away. So
That's true.
I think there's still a lot of internal debate in the GOP that has to do with FISA, because there are some really loud critics who say we are not going to rubber stamp this thing. And with such tiny, tiny majorities in both the House and the Senate, whether you're a D or an R, you've got to manage this legislation very carefully.
And you're right. Given even the narrow margins of difference in the parties, there is also some bipartisan concerns, some civil libertarian concerns from Republicans and Democrats. And there are arguments that we've been hearing, really since the aftermath of 9/11, when FISA really was put to the forefront, expanded. And certainly there has been a lot of criticism of the way that FISA was used as part of the Mueller report and the sort of investigation that predated the Mueller report, right? That's where a lot of the Republican specifically concerns are rooted.
Yeah, and the tricky thing with FISA is it's ex parte, meaning that only one side is represented. The government goes in and says we have this, concern, we need a warrant. So there's no one showing up from the other side, because you can't tip them off. You can't say like, oh yeah, we're going to drag this person in here and let them fight about whether we can get a warrant or not. But because of that, the FISA courts are exceptionally powerful. And we saw exposure about, was information falsified that was given to the FISA court? And is that how some of these warrants were obtained? And I think a lot of that blew up in the wake of the Mueller investigation and has made people very skeptical about it, lawmakers and everyday Americans alike.
Well, for now, I guess we won't worry about space wars. But
outer space.
Listen, it was an extraordinary week.
Don't you feel like we're saying that every week?
Can't imagine where you're starting on Sunday morning.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I think there are tons of foreign policy concerns, this weird Russia national security thing. And to remind folks, next weekend is South Carolina. So, does Nikki Haley stay in? The latest poll, I think, has her down by 30 plus points. What is her argument? We've got brand new Fox News polling that is really interesting out of North Carolina and Michigan as well on all kinds of issues, giving Trump very narrow leads in both those states. But when you throw third-party candidates in, that really shakes up the polls even more. And we have polling on how the president is handling everything from climate change to foreign policy. And again, on many of what voters tell us their top issues are, they do give the edge to Donald Trump. We're months out from a general, and we'll just have to see. But we've got new polling.
Long way, as we've been talking about between now and then, but always important to see where we are. And for that, we always turn to you, Shannon Bream. Appreciate the time as always.
Thanks, Jared. Always great to chat with you.